Hey, this is JC and welcome to Small Brick City. In this video, I'll be showcasing this coffee stand MOC. And for those who are interested, I'll go into detail into my approach and techniques on how I create highly detailed small builds and MOCs. But really, the tips and tricks I share will apply to MOCs of any size. After all, in many ways, a larger MOC is just a smaller MOC that is bigger in scale, so you're basically multiplying the same techniques or expanding them across a larger space. I designed this because I know many people have custom LEGO cities, and every city must have a coffee stand, and that's why LEGO built these mugs. You might already have a cafe or restaurant, but maybe not a dedicated coffee place, and you might not have the space for a full building, so I deliberately built this small. This sits on a base plate of 12 studs by 12 studs, and I designed it to fit on the corner of a street. But you could of course take out the stand because it measures only 6 studs deep and 12 studs across. You can just take the stand and put it into your own building or wherever it is convenient and it can fit. Let's have a look all around the stand first. I designed this to be a modern coffee stand, so there's a lot of glass parts so that you can see inside, and this is accurate for many of these small coffee stands that you might be able to see. And for a LEGO city, it's good to build it this way. A lot of light can come in, and also if I were to build this solid, if you have to place it in your LEGO city, it might be difficult to look inside for the details. Here you can just look all around. Even without taking off the roof, you can easily see inside. But I also designed this to be modular in style, in that the roof can be removed just like that. So this allows you to have easy access into the coffee stand and to look at the details. Let's have a look at this roof first. This logo comes from the cafe in the assembly square. The way I see this particular coffee stand, it's a spin-off stall from the main store from the assembly square. And I think it's just a nice way to keep an entire LEGO city cohesive by seeing the same brands all around. I also really like this logo. I think it's really dynamic. It uses quite a bit of parts to build together, but we have a coffee cup which is steaming against what looks like a starburst. So I think it looks really nice. And I rebuilt this from the one in the assembly square, and I designed a bracket and holder to hold it in place. I'm not going to teach how to build this particular sign. You can always check out the instructions on LEGO for the assembly square and look for how to build the sign. But I designed this particular sign so that overhangs down over the front edge of the roof as well. I find this to look nicer, especially when you put the roof on. It just makes it more dynamic by having this hanging down slightly and not just placed onto the roof. The roof itself is made from a single plate, which makes it really strong, but I covered it with tiles to give it a very finished look. Let's have a look at the coffee stand itself. I've got 3 minifigures set in the stall, although I've got another jumper plate for 1 minifig. This is the customer, and we've got 2 baristas, one collecting some money and in charge of the pastries, and we have one female barista over here, and she's holding on to that LEGO coffee cup, which is a minifig accessory part. Now, if you do not have this part, do not worry, you can recreate one using a round 1x1 brick and a white towel on top, and that looks pretty close. For the counter itself, I just want it nice and clean, so I have one jumper plate for the cup, just to be symbolic of something on the counter. But real coffee stands have all kinds of goodies on display, so if you like, feel free to put jumper plates or other plates if you're recreating this so that you can put other goodies. I did have this pastry stand which I built over here. It gives access to the pastry, but also just looks like a nice display case. Here I've got a modified bricks. You can use regular bricks of course if you like, but I think this just gives a nice little detail. As far as possible, I always like to just use different type of bricks and plates to create that visual contrast. As mentioned before, this is modern, so you can see all the way through. There's a large glass panel, a glass door, and only this side here is solid. On the inside, I've towed it with white with 2 jumper plates. On this side over here, we've got the heart and soul of the coffee stand, and there's a blender, I guess to make like frappuccinos or ice blended drinks. There's a coffee machine, and all this just fits nicely into this side of the coffee stand. I've taught how to build these 2 builds in separate video tutorials, and you can check out the links in the description below. On the opposite side, I have got just a little drawer, as well as a cash register and some cash. And this is symbolic of the administrative area of this particular coffee stand. Generally, when I'm building these small builds, I always want to have different things that represent what you might find in the actual builds to make it as realistic as possible. So the trick is, of course, to make it as detailed as possible without it making it look overcrowded. I hope you enjoyed this little coffee stand MOC. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested into the details of this particular build and how I approach designing detailed builds and MOCs, carry on watching. All builds, regardless of their size, start off with a base plate. And I'm not using a thin base plate here, but I'm using the hard plates as my base. And I figured out that this particular build should use a base plate of about 12 by 12. I didn't have a single base plate, and that's good because I can show you how to join base plates when you use them as your foundation. So I actually have two base plates here. They are 6 by 12 each. So anytime you need to lay down a base plate, especially if you have to join base plates, you want to put down a layer of 1 by something plates. This is to form the foundation of your build, and it also helps to stick or join these two base plates together like this. Now, it's not enough just to hold the base plates together like this. You use the towels when you do the surface to make the fit more secure, but this is your starting point. So you want to work out the dimensions of your particular build on the base plate. One thing that I found really useful, especially for small builds, is to ensure that everything goes by even numbers. So this is 6 by 12. You want to do that opposed to 5 by 12, for example. It does make things easier because most of LEGO standard parts and a lot of the builds are in even numbers. So by having an even number, you do make your life easier and you can use less bricks to build something. Because once you have odd number studs, you will need to use like a 1 by 1 brick or 1 by 3 brick. You need odd number bricks to form, let's say, a wall or a counter or whatever you're building. And this can take up more bricks. With even number parts, you can use prefabricated parts like panel pieces, window pieces, to act as supports as well as the walls, which is why and how you save bricks and pieces and makes your build much easier. So that's the first step. Work out the dimensions you want with an even number and lay down the plates. And of course, if you're joining plates, you want to make sure that you have plates that are covering the joint so there's a secure fit. Okay, so once you have done this, you now need to come up with your structure. In this case, when I decided to build a coffee stand, I knew I just wanted to have a front counter and some kind of a back enclosure. And I came up with the back enclosure first. So I've kind of pre-built everything, but it's pretty straightforward. To save on parts, I used 3 window parts, or 3 windows and 1 door, but they use all the same frame. And I used a big transparent panel part. And together they form a little U shape, which I can put together like this. And they're held together by towels on top. And these jumper plates are of course to take the roof later on. But with just several parts, I have created this little enclosure and the main structure of the coffee stand. Notice I also had a color scheme. I decided to go with brown, white, and a bit of gray. I think that works very well with a coffee stand. And I could have just made this all white, but again, just to create some kind of visual texture and variety, I always try to break things up like that. And that's a good rule to follow anytime you're doing some kind of build. If you have large surfaces which are just monotone or just one color, try to add in a layer of bricks or plates to break it up, and it really makes a big difference. For the brick over here, I chose to use a modified brick because it gives more texture. But if you don't have modified bricks like that, you can just use regular bricks. So that is the structure of my coffee stand. Oh, I should mention it's actually the wrong way because this is the front. So let me just switch that around. So how do I decide which is the front and which is the back? By and large, I'm taking my cue from the expert modular buildings, since the expert modular buildings are a staple in most, if not all LEGO cities, it's good to take that as a starting point. So for expert modular buildings, they generally have 6 studs of sidewalk space or clear space in front of a building. So since this is a small build, I thought 4 studs would be good enough. But remember, again, I kept to even numbers. This just makes it easier, and this leaves me with an even number behind as well. So I can't stress this enough. It really makes your life easier if you work with even numbers as far as you can. Of course, sometimes it doesn't always work due to your design, and it just so happens you have an odd number. If I can, I'll always try to keep it an even number, but I don't die by that rule. I will work with odd numbers if I have to, if that's the design. So I knew next I would have some kind of kitchen counter, or sorry, a coffee counter, and this is what I came up with. Now, when I first built this, I didn't have this layer of jumper plates and tiles. So I'm just going to remove this first so you understand my starting point. I always just start off with plates, and I only add in all these jumper plates and tiles or extra plates to hold things later on. And that's only after I figure out the placement of my stuff. So I just built the structure first. In this case, I followed the same color scheme with brown, gray, and white. And I've got 2 plates here. Of course, if you have 1 plate, it's always better. But I didn't have such a long plate, so I used 2 smaller plates. And this goes on top. And there you can see that forms the basis of the coffee stand already. After I do this, I don't detail it yet. I go with the roof. I always approach a build by completing the structure first. Detailing such as tiling comes in later. I know when you buy LEGO sets and it comes with the LEGO instructions, they go layer by layer, but that's generally because that's how the instructions are made. Even when I provide instructions, I will go layer by layer as well. But that's only because I've worked out the entire design, and through the digital designer, we can create the instructions layer by layer, making it easy for you to build. But when I'm building MOCs, I only go for structures first. I do not care about the finishing. Let's move on to the roof. And in this case, my roof is a single plate, and that's because of the structure of my coffee stand. There's no center support, so it's ideal to use a single plate. If I didn't have a single plate, then I would have to use 2 plates and use plates just like we did below to join them together to make it one piece. But then that makes the roof much thicker, which is not something I wanted. So at least for this design, I wanted a single plate, and that fits onto the jumper plates nicely, just like that. But I knew I wanted some kind of logo, so before I started this build, I decided to have this a spin-off of the cafe from Assembly Square, and that's where that logo came in. So I had the extra parts and I rebuilt the logo that you see here. But I had to mount it onto the roof in some way, and just due to the nature of this particular design, the recessed studs are vertically here, so you can't really attach it directly. There are no studs here, so you can't put it on top. Another thing is you have to put this right in the middle of the plate, which means you're between studs. So you need to offset whatever your connection is so that it's centered. So all this can pose as a challenge. So the way to figure this out, if you're new, it might seem quite difficult and foreign. So the first thing I would always say is get yourself knowledgeable with different LEGO parts. So when I first started, I basically spent hours on Bricklink just going through the catalog and being familiar with parts. Even if I didn't have LEGO sets with the parts, I just looked at the images and photographs so that I understood the different parts, how they looked like, and what the names of the parts were, and which category that fall under Bricklink. And this really helps you because with a vocabulary of parts, it's much easier to design connections and solve building problems along the way. So knowledge to me is always the first step. So the way I approached this was to use a bracket, and I use a 2x2 and 1x2 on one side. So this right angle bracket, and the studs on this side. So this allows me to put this in the center of the roof, just like that. But I can't attach the sign to it. I could, just like that, but see what happens? It will be offset. It won't be in the center. Now, of course, you don't always have to have things in the center, but in this design, I wanted the logo in the center. So that means I needed to offset these studs to create studs in the center. And I do that using jumper plates. So anytime you want to offset studs by half a stud space, jumper plates come in. And I use two, and the reason I use two is because this is a pretty big sign, and this allows me to stick the sign in securely. If I had only one stud, it might be a bit loose. If I knock it slightly, it would drop off. So this is a much more secure fit. So now that I've got this roof, I finished the roof first, simply because this is self-contained by itself. So I've got the roof part which I finished here. So let me take this off. So what I did was to cover the tiles all the way, and I used symmetry. I didn't want to break up the symmetry, and that's why I didn't put in 1x2 plates or 1x4 plates here, but this is what I did. So I wanted to create a design, but at the same time hold this bracket down even more firmly. So to do that, I use these two 3-stud corner plates, and this fills in the space on either side. This allows me then to take 2 more plates to cover the studs and overlap onto the bracket. So now that bracket is really firmly in place on the front of the roof. So that is finished, and that of course can go on, and that will be the finished roof. So once I finish the roof, I can move that aside, and I can start off with the rest of the build. The next step of my design and build process is to figure out what small builds go into the space of the MOC. This includes any furniture, equipment, or different small builds that are logical to place into a small MOC. In this case, this is a coffee stand, so it's pretty straightforward, and I've got 3 main small builds that will be included in the set. One is a coffee machine and a blender on a custom counter. Got a cash register on a set of drawers, and finally a pastry shelf or a display case, and this will go onto the counter of the coffee stand. Let's go with the biggest build first, and that's usually how I work. I start with the biggest and find a place for it, and I generally always go against the walls to maximize and to save space. So I have to find out a logical position for this. Now, I won't put it on this side of the stall simply because it blocks the door. So you do not want to block any access like a door, and if you can, a window. Sometimes it's not possible for windows simply because there's a lack of space, but by and large I will avoid blocking any access points. So it makes sense for the coffee machine and blender to be on this side of the stall. Now if I put it here, it takes up a lot of space, but more importantly, minifigs can't work because there's not enough space. So it makes sense to turn it 90 degrees and position it at one end right over here. Notice I'm not pressing this down just yet, because what I'm doing is just figuring out the position and the space. And only when I've determined the space for the different pieces of furniture and equipment do I mark them down. The next thing I have to put in is this cash register, and I put in drawers just so that there's storage space. This is kind of the administrative area of the stall. So it makes sense to put it on the opposite side, and this would make perfect sense. And notice there's just one brick space over here, so I'm utilizing that space to put this in that corner or in this end, simply because I'm making use of this one brick space. It doesn't block the door, and there's not much space here, so you want to fully utilize the space. And that's why I chose a cash register, which is 1x2 brick, or 1 brick in width. I didn't take the 2 brick cash register. Same thing with this chest of drawers. I just made it using a 1 brick, and this is a modified brick with jumper plates on it. So this fits really well. I have kind of populated the coffee stand with the different equipment, and it's looking good. Now, one thing I should mention, anytime I put in furniture, I always have a minifig on standby, and that's to make sure that the scale and the height of the different equipment and furniture is right, because I build everything in my city to minifig scale. Not everyone does, so if you do not intend to build minifig scale buildings or MOCs, this is not very important. But in my case, for Small Brick City, every build is minifig scale or as close as minifig scale as possible. So I always have this minifig when I'm building to make sure the height is right. For a cash register, he must be able to press the buttons easily. Same with a coffee machine, he must be able to reach that coffee pot in a logical manner. So once I determine the height is right, I now think about putting them down in the position on the plate. Typically, when I put any piece of furniture, I always put an extra plate underneath. So in this case, this would be a 2x4 plate. And the reason is because I'm tiling the surface of the plate. And when you add tiles to a surface, you're adding a thickness of a plate or a tile thick. So if this is a tile and you place the furniture on just the plate, it's actually sunken in by one plate thickness. So if it's important, you need to raise it up the same height, and the way to do that is to put another plate. However, if I put another plate for this particular build, what will happen is it'll be just a bit too high for the minifig. It would seem an overstretch for him to reach to take the coffee pot. So I'm deliberately not putting a plate for this particular build. I'm not putting a plate under it. So it will be actually one plate lower than the rest of the build. But this is a unique case. In all other cases, I would always put a plate underneath. So for example, for this particular build, I will put an additional 1x4 plate to raise it up by one plate. And I'm going to clamp this down or press this down now. I'm not going to press this down just yet, and I'll tell you why. Remember, my support is a 2x4 brick, but my countertop is 3 studs wide. That's why there's a slight of a recess. I do want to cover that tile or the plate with tiles or something, because remember my 2-stud rule, you want to try to work with even numbers, and I'm going to cover the inside with 2x2 plates. So I'll calculate the plates, the tiles, sorry, 2x2 tiles, and I'll calculate the space here, and therefore I'm going to end up with a 1x4 space underneath that block because I'm taking out one stud space here, so that's the other stud space. But I don't just want to use a tile. I think that's a bit boring. Since this is a coffee stand and there's liquid going on, I'm going to create a bit of drainage. So I'm going to use these 1x2 modified tiles in the form of grill pieces and place them here. So this will be in place of the tiles. So now I can put this coffee maker counter over here, and those grills are just under there. So that is logical, and I didn't put it in earlier because it'll be very difficult for me to reach if I press them down. So now that I press them down, I can actually cover these exposed studs with tiles. I'm going to use a combination of smooth tiles and jumper plates, and the reason for the jumper plates is so that you can put the minifigs in. So let's figure this out now. So I'm going to put one here, definitely, and I'll place one here so that there's a minifig who can work on the coffee, and then I can have one more plate or jumper plate just next to her. Maybe I'll put it down here so they don't bang, and this minifig would work on the cash register, and I'll fill in the rest of the space here. So when I'm thinking about builds like this, I do think about how many minifigs I want to include in a build. And for a coffee stand, it is reasonable to have 2 employees or 2 staff working behind the counter. So therefore I have 2 jumper plates, one for each of them, and then I can tile out the rest of the space. So there we have the inside of the stand already done. What I need to do now is to work on the counter and on the outside. So for the counter, I have to figure out where I want to put this pastry display. So I don't want to put it all the way to the end. I like to give a bit of clearance space, although this makes it easier for tiling purposes, but I think it makes more sense to just put it here on the inside of the coffee stand, because this, I feel it's a bit on the outside because this is the main support. So the small detail, and I think it's just a bit nitpicky of me to do it, but I think these small details also do help improve the build, even if it's a bit more inconvenient, as I'll explain in just a bit. So I do want this entire surface to be smooth. It's not necessary, but I do like to give nice finishes to my MOCs if I can. It just makes it look more presentable and just more polished. So I will have to put tile pieces over here, but that means, as before, as with the furniture and appliances on the ground, you need to raise this up by one plate. So I need to have a 2x2 white plate to raise it up so that we on the same level as the counter, or when I put the tiling on the counter. And now I can take 2x2 white tiles and just cover the counter to form a smooth surface. I'm putting in jumper plate here, that's for my coffee cup. And I'll put in one more 2x2. Now you understand what I mean by it's a bit inconvenient. By placing it off to one side, I've actually split this up. So now there are two separate studs of 1x2 exposed. If I were to just put it over here, I could easily just take another 2x2 white tile and place it on top, and that will be done. But because I do want this offset, just so that everything is not too symmetrical and it fits within the stand, I now have these two studs instead. So I'll have to have 1x2 tiles. And it just means that you need a more variety of different parts. So now that is done, that's nice. I'm just going to put the coffee cup there. So that is covered and we're almost done. If you intend to place this into your city, you want to blend this in with your sidewalks, assuming it's on the outside. So you need to tile this to create some kind of a sidewalk. So just for purposes of this demonstration, I'll tile this up just to finish it. When I work with tiling, I again follow the expert modular buildings. I used to not worry about what colors the tiles were, but now I'm a bit more particular because for the expert modular buildings, the front sidewalks are always dark gray and not light gray. The sidewalks are dark gray, but the curb is a light gray. So I'm going to follow that. For the back, it's more open. You can do whatever you want, but let's concentrate on this front first. So the first thing I'm going to do is put this 1x something long tile in front for the curb. Remember, these are two plates to form one, so there is a joint here. I want to reinforce the joint in the front because you can see it's slightly splitting right there. And I'll just use a 1x8 light gray tile, put it over, and now I have secured it even better. So I've got the joint covered by all the bricks and plates over here, but now just the front, it's not going to split as easily because I'm putting this 1x8 long tile. And just to mix things up, I'm going to put a little drainage with another grill piece, and I'll follow this by a 1x2 gray tile, just like that. Now for the inside, I'm going to put 2x2 dark gray pieces. And the reason I'm not putting jumper plates here is simply because it's very close to this counter and minifigs won't be able to fit properly if I were to use a 2x2 jumper plate. So instead, I'm going to use 1x2 jumper plates here. So I'm going to just put one here and I'll put one here, two different positions for two different customers, and then I can fill in the rest of the space with 1x2 tiles just to match up with the 2x2 tiles, and everything looks nice and finished. And let's just finish this. Again, you can finish this in any way you like. Some people like to keep the back alley or the back sidewalk, as you would call it, unfinished, just so that it looks more rough. But let's just finish this MOC properly, and I'll tile it with 2x2 dark gray pieces as well. My thoughts are, for a coffee stand, is generally not put in an alley. It's usually right in the middle of a busy intersection, or at least at the side of an intersection or road. So it makes sense that the sidewalk behind it is also tiled properly, because it may be just on a sidewalk itself. And there we have that. All that's needed is to put in the minifigs and to put on the roof, and we would have completed the coffee stand MOC. I hope you enjoyed this video and gained some insight into how I design highly detailed builds and MOCs. And I hope you can apply these tips and tricks to your own builds. And if you do build something highly detailed, please share it with me by putting the link in the comments below, or you can reach out to me on Instagram. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Talk to you soon.